Hi, welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Laura.
We are here with another case for you.
Yes.
We'll just get right to it today. How about that?
Okay. I'm excited. I need a
distraction.
Something else to think about this.
Right.
I love just getting to learn about new cases. Keep me safer.
Yeah. Like we were talking about earlier.
I know. Like now I turn on the alarm when I'm home and alone and getting
During
ready.
the day.
Yeah. You just think about those things. When you hear about it, the more you know.
Right. And I think
about things.
That was part of the idea behind our podcast was jumping into true crime in a palatable way, but learning some of those life lessons that you don't think about otherwise without hearing about them.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get going. Let's learn about this next one.
All right. We have a person living with, I believe to be dead. Those were the chilling words heard on a 911 call from Carbondale, Illinois, on the morning of March 24th, 2012. The caller was 22-year-old Richie Minton, reporting that his ex-girlfriend, Molly Young, was unresponsive and, quote, covered in blood, and he claimed that she had, quote, just committed suicide. At first glance, it sounded like a tragic suicide, a young woman found dead from a gunshot wound in her ex-boyfriend's apartment. But as details emerged, nothing about this case was straightforward. Was it truly a suicide or something darker? Over a decade later, Molly Young's family believes that her death was not what they've been told by everyone else. It officially remains undetermined. Her family and a multitude of supporters now believe there's far more to the story, clues that point to foul play, missteps in the investigation, and a possible cover-up. Before we talk about the details of that night in March, I want to tell you about Molly. Molly Marie Young was a 21-year-old Southern Illinois woman with a creative soul. She was born April 15th, 1990. She was the youngest of 3 children of Larry and Kathy Young. Molly's friends and family remember her as very talented, kind, caring, and compassionate. She was an aspiring artist and photographer. In fact, in high school, she had earned an award at Carnegie Hall for one of her photographs, which went on display at the U.S. Department of Education. Molly had she had a bright future. She was known for her heart of gold and creative spirit. Like many young adults, Molly had her struggles too. In her late teens, she went through a health scare, fearing that she had thyroid cancer. But the mass turned out to be benign after surgery. Emotionally, though, Molly had documented some dark moments in between, in journals and in messages. She struggled at times with depression and anxiety. She had been described the anti-anxiety medication, lorazepam, at some point. Family members later acknowledged that Molly had previously written a suicide note, but it was long before 2012. And they did say that she had survived past overdose attempts. Okay. However, those closest to Molly paint a nuanced picture. They say that despite any bouts of depression, Molly wasn't in a state of despair in March 2012. Her father, Larry, who we'll talk about a lot, he's a really big advocate, insists that Molly was happy and she had a lot to live for. He described her as happy-go-lucky at this time in her life. He also, and this is important, specifically stated that she hated guns. It was notable because Molly wasn't someone you'd expect to handle a firearm, let alone use one to complete suicide. She had recently been dating on and off a young man named Richie, and although that relationship was a little rocky, Molly's loved ones do not believe that she was destined or determined to end her own life at that time. Who was Richie? Well, he was 22. He was Molly's ex-boyfriend, although some say it was an on-again, off-again boyfriend. And at the time, he worked as a dispatcher for the Carbondale Police Department. By all accounts, the relationship was tumultuous. Molly's mother would later allege that Richie was manipulative and belittling to Molly. They broke up and then got back together frequently. At one point, Molly even became pregnant with Richie's child. She chose to end the pregnancy during their unstable relationship and just where she was in life at the time. This history that we went over sets the stage for the tragic night of March 23rd to March 24th. This volatile relationship, a young woman who did have a past history with mental health struggles, and an ex-boyfriend employed within law enforcement. It's a combination that would soon become the focus of this really intense scrutiny. On Friday, March 23rd, 2012, Richie went out for the evening. According to Richie's later account, he got very drunk that night. In the pre-dawn hours of March 24th, which was a Saturday, around 3 a.m., Richie texted or called, reporting says both, asking her to come over to his apartment in Carbondale. He implied he needed help. He was intoxicated, perhaps not feeling well. Despite the late, or rather very early hour, depending on if you're a morning bird or a night owl.
Yep.
The fact that Molly and Richie weren't exactly on the best of terms at the time. Molly was a really caring person, and she agreed to come and help him. She drove over to Richie's place, an apartment that he shared with a roommate named Wes. Now, what exactly happened between the time Molly arrived, which was approximately 3:30 a.m., and the time that emergency services were called, is the crux of this mystery. We have two main narratives. We have Richie's version and the suspicions later raised by Molly's family and lots of investigators that agree with Molly's family.
And no input from Wes?
A little bit, not a lot.
Okay.
I wish there were more.
Yeah.
Let's start with Richie's account of the morning, which comes from police reports and his statements. Richie claims that he was so intoxicated that after calling Molly for help, he essentially passed out and was asleep when Molly arrived. He says he has little to no memory of what happened beyond that point. Okay. Sometime around 7 a.m., Richie was supposed to report for an early shift at his dispatcher job, but he didn't show up. This was unusual. A concerned coworker called Richie's phone when he missed his 7 a.m. start time. Richie later said that phone call from work is what actually woke him up that morning. Upon waking up, according to Richie, he discovered a horrifying scene. Molly was lying on the floor, unresponsive and covered in blood. Crucially, Richie initially thought Molly had overdosed or somehow bled from her nose. He did not immediately report a gunshot or a suicide when he first sought help. In fact, one of the first things Richie said when help was being called was that she overdosed and was bleeding from her nose, implying a drug overdose or a medical issue instead of this gunshot. Richie says when he woke up his roommate, Wes, sometime right around 9 a.m., he told Wes that he couldn't find his own phone to call 911 for help. Richie's phone might have been displaced or dead. Remember, he was really drunk when he went to bed the night before. This is one of my first questions, though. Did they have a house phone? I mean, it is 2012, so there were more than there are now. But how did that phone call from his coworker wake him up?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
And what time did the coworker call? Did he let it go for 2 hours before calling? Some of the stuff that I haven't been able to find that I would like to find out related to this case.
Yeah, because if he's supposed to start at 7, it seems like you wouldn't wait till 9 or 8:30. Be like 30 minutes. You're like, hey, where are you? Calling them. Unless he had a history of being late.
It said that he didn't, but there's the other part of my brain that thinks if you're out drinking really heavily until 3 a.m. and you have to be at work in 4 hours, that's not even enough time to get it all out of your system.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
I don't actually know about that.
Yeah, it seems like, because I know when I used to work like at the hospital, if people aren't there, 10 minutes, we're calling them, hey, where are you?
Right.
Because other people are waiting to take over so they can leave.
Yes, exactly. And so I feel like there's a time gap there that isn't necessarily accounted for. It would be different if you had to be at work at 9 a.m. as opposed to 7.
Yeah.
Now, here's where we have concrete records. The 911 call. At 9:02 a.m. on March 24th, 2012, a call to emergency dispatch was made from Richie's apartment, dialed by his roommate, Wes. Wes told the dispatcher that he believed Molly was dead. Then Wes handed the phone to Richie. What happened next is recorded and has been made public since this happened. Richie, being a police dispatcher himself, recognized the person that answered the phone. It was a colleague named Amber. And here's a little snippet from that call. The 911 dispatcher said, "Is she not breathing at all?" Richie said, "No, I woke up and she's covered in blood. She overdosed. She bled out through her nose." Moments later in the same call, Richie addresses the dispatcher by name. He says, "Amber, this is Richie. My girlfriend just committed suicide. Can you send a car over?" The exchange is a little bit eerie. Observers noted that Richie's tone on the call was disturbingly calm for being in that situation.
Yeah.
It's not like he was a first responder or an EMT. He was one of the other dispatchers.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be used to coming to scenes like that.
Well, and even if you were, if it's your family member or someone you know, I can't imagine being calm about that.
Someone you have been in a relationship with on and off even.
Yeah.
His tone was so disturbing that one media headline clipped he sounded as if he were, quote, ordering a pizza. Oh. Richie initially described an overdose and bleeding, then explicitly stated Molly, quote, committed suicide. He also specifically requested the start of the ambulance, but then a police car. Let's pause here. We have to consider, if Molly had been shot, how did Richie not immediately mention a gunshot wound? Why is his first explanation an overdose? According to reports, just a few minutes after the initial call, Richie or someone from the apartment made another call to dispatch, clarifying that a gun had been found. In this follow-up, Richie revealed that he found his gun lying next to Molly, and now he believed she had shot herself. It appears there was a brief window where even responding officers were unsure what they were dealing with. In fact, about an hour after the 911 call, a state police investigator emailed that the circumstances looked suspicious and should be treated as a homicide. Yet, interestingly, by the next day, the local coroner was indicating the death appeared to be suicide. And so we'll get into the inquest and the cause of death findings in a minute. The official timeline has Molly's time of death estimated around 4:45 a.m., several hours before that 911 call was made. Now, this gap is significant. It suggests that if Molly indeed died around 4:45, close to 5 a.m., we have roughly 4, maybe 5-hour delay before Richie or anyone phoned for help. Richie's story kind of accounts for this by saying he was passed out, completely drunk, until 8:30, 9 a.m., when that call from work woke him up. But skeptics have wondered if there was a deliberate delay. In fact, one neighbor in the apartment complex later reported a curious detail. She remembered seeing a police officer knocking on doors around 7 a.m. or 8 a.m., well before that 9:02, 9:03 emergency call. This neighbor told a reporter, "I got up around 7 or 8 and a police officer woman was knocking on my door," which kind of raised the question of why an officer would have been on the scene earlier than the official 911 call. Yeah. It could be a coincidence. It could be a mistaken time recollection, or maybe it could imply that someone in law enforcement was informally alerted even earlier than 911.
Well, I was thinking too, if they're in an apartment complex and there's a gun that's going off, could someone have heard it and called in to have someone come and check?
They could. And I wonder both that, but also why it would have been 2-3 hours later.
Yeah.
Unless
maybe they heard it like at 4:30 in the morning and didn't really know what they were hearing. And then when they woke up in the morning, speaking to someone else, like, oh yeah, I think I heard that too. Maybe we'll call to get, but also I wonder how Wes didn't hear anything.
And we'll get into more of that in a minute because Wes and Richie should have heard it, even being that passed out.
Yes. Especially if he's going to be okay to get up in 3 hours to go to work.
Right. And I can imagine if he passed out right after reaching out to Molly, then I still feel like you would be able to wake up in 2 hours.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've never been passed out drunk, so I don't know.
Right. It's like,
I don't know what that would be like. I have no idea if you would be able to sleep through something like that. But I would assume
I
not.
don't either. And also investigators, certain ones also assume not as well.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
The Carbondale police deny any response prior to 9:03 a.m. to that first call that's documented. As of now, this discrepancy is just that, an odd discrepancy in the timeline, but it is interesting and of note. First responders arrived at Richie's apartment shortly after the call. The police officers were first on scene, but importantly, because Richie was an employee of the police department, the Carbondale police chief did quickly call in the Illinois State Police to handle the investigation to avoid any conflict of interest.
Well, that's good.
Yes. The scene was then turned over to state police investigators. Inside the small bedroom of the apartment, the body of Molly was found on the floor. She had sustained a single gunshot wound to the head, specifically a contact wound on the left side of her scalp. The bullet entered about 2¼ inches above her left ear and left eyebrow and left of her midline on her head, traveling slightly backward and slightly downward. In other words, she was shot near her temple forehead area at a downward angle on the left side using a powerful handgun. It was a .45 caliber pistol, and that was found at the scene and determined to be the weapon that had fired this fatal shot. The gun belonged to Richie. Forensics and evidence collection at the scene are where things get very contentious. Here are some of the findings. The first one, there were no fingerprints on the gun. Investigators found no usable fingerprints on the .45 caliber that killed Molly. This is unusual. You would expect to find Molly's prints on it.
Yeah.
Or the owner's prints on it from using it in the past. The only way you wouldn't is if it had been wiped clean.
Yeah.
They did gunshot residue tests. Police swabbed Richie. They swabbed his roommate Wes and Molly's hands. All the tests came back negative for gunshot residue. Normally, when a gun is fired, especially one like a .45, the shooter's hands and nearby surfaces have traces of residue.
Yeah.
This complete absence of gunshot residue on everyone was puzzling.
Yeah. Especially on Molly.
Right.
I don't know. Everything you've told me so far doesn't make sense. And we're not even...
It doesn't make sense.
Into it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Also, Richie had fresh scratches. He had 2 long 6-inch scratches on his body, and reports differ on whether it was on his back or his side. They found this when they interviewed him that morning. Richie told officers that he, quote, must have gotten them while giving Molly CPR. Many, including Molly's family, found that explanation doubtful. It's hard to imagine receiving deep scratch marks from a person who is already either unconscious or deceased. There are also
CPR to somebody, they don't have a heartbeat, so they would not be scratching you.
And if you weren't up When it happened, giving her CPR, she'd already been deceased. So how did she scratch you?
Yeah.
There are also unconfirmed reports that Richie's roommate, Wes, had some scratch marks as well. But the official investigation focused more on Richie's injuries, and those were more documented. But if true, that definitely raises more questions about some kind of struggle.
Yeah.
And like we said, Molly's hands were clean, not just with gunshot residue, but also there was no blood on her hands, which is not possible, really.
Right.
There are crime scene photos, and these were later obtained by a FOIA request, which is a request for records. And they showed Molly's hands surprisingly clean, despite this fatal head wound. No blowback blood or obvious residue on her hands, which some reports said could happen in a self-inflicted contact wound, but others said it couldn't happen, which is weird that we don't know if it is one or the other.
Well, especially because I'm assuming she's right-handed.
Yes.
Which is why you're going to be reaching around. You're going to be reaching around. That's going to be, or if you're trying to do it left-handed, but
well, and think about holding it like up, like to get that downward angle that it did come in at. It seems like it would be more of an upward angle.
I could see that, but it would be
you would have to use your non-dominant hand
if you're not left-handed. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was your intention to try and complete suicide, why you would do it that way if you weren't left-handed. That just doesn't make sense.
And if I were Molly's family, I would find that impossible to believe as an explanation. Left-handed with a firearm, no fingerprints, no gunshot residue,
no blood,
wrong hand, downward angle.
Yeah.
I would really struggle with that information. And then also being told that she is the one that did this.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Molly's body position was also odd. Molly was found on the bedroom floor, but later her family would claim evidence that her body had been moved before police arrived. They noted she had unexplained bruises on various parts of her body that, to their private investigator and to them, looked like a struggle. The exact details of the body position versus blood pooling patterns haven't been publicly released, but Molly's father believes the scene was not exactly as it initially appeared. There was also blood at the scene. Molly's gunshot wound caused bleeding, which Richie noticed as coming from her nose. However, details like blood spatter or patterns also haven't been fully publicly disclosed. State investigators early on flagged the scene as suspicious in internal communication. These findings, or lack of, set the stage for immediate suspicion. And I mean, it's what we talked about, the fingerprints, the GSR. If Richie was the shooter, you might expect to find GSR even on his clothes or find his prints on the gun. And if she was, you would expect to find those as well, which they did not. In a state police report later, it was noted that Carbondale officers may have allowed Richie to wash his hands and change clothes before going to the station. The Carbondale police chief, Judy O'Gwyn, vehemently denied this, saying he was not allowed to wash his hands. We did not allow him to wash his hands. Nonetheless, Richie did end up with clean hands by the time of testing, whether he washed them or he wasn't the one that used the gun. Within hours of Molly's death, we have a scenario that can be interpreted in two starkly different ways. We either have that Molly was depressed and completed suicide. Perhaps she came over, she found Richie's gun. Maybe he just had it sitting out. I mean, college students probably aren't really having that gun safe.
Yeah.
And maybe she completed suicide while Richie was passed out unconscious. It just doesn't make sense to me. If she came over and he was already passed out, why wouldn't she just
Why would you
go back
leave?
home?
Yeah.
Exactly. Why would you do that there?
Right.
In this theory, they say Richie woke up, panicked. Maybe he touched or moved the gun. But then you think about him not in the first call saying that there even was a gun.
Yeah.
Maybe it was in between when he called and then called again, I suppose. They suggest that in the shock, he got blood on his hands, so he washed his hands. Maybe there was blood and it was his gun and he didn't want that on his gun. Maybe he washed that too, wiping away fingerprints, gunshot residue from both him and the gun in the process. Some evidence cited for this theory was Molly's history of depression and that she had texts expressing suicidal intent, which we'll go over in a minute. Those were more recent, but the letter was from quite a while ago, like 3-4 years prior. The homicide theory, which is what her family believes, was that Richie and possibly his roommate were involved in Molly's death. Perhaps an argument or a physical fight occurred where Richie got those scratches, potentially Wes as well. She was shot either intentionally or during a struggle. Richie, being a police dispatcher, perhaps immediately knew how to make it look like she completed suicide. He might have wiped the gun clean, waited to call 911, maybe allowing time for that level of alcohol to metabolize so that he could have a better mindset for what he said. Exactly.
Yeah.
In this view, the absence of evidence, no prints, no gunshot residue, is itself evidence of a deliberate cleanup in their mind. Molly's father, Larry, has bluntly said, cover-up and ineptness are twins, implying that either investigators were sloppy or someone actively covered up the truth. At the scene, Richie and his roommate were briefly questioned by police that morning, and then they were taken to the station. Notably, by the time police had Richie at the station, he had invoked his right to an attorney and refused to answer questions, which, in my viewpoint, isn't the worst thing to do. It's smart. It's what you would suggest other people do. But to family of the victim, it looks suspicious, which I understand.
Yeah.
From that point on, Richie did not give any additional statements. Richie never testified under oath and to this day has largely stayed silent publicly on the details of what happened. The police did take some immediate actions. Aside from processing the scene at Richie's apartment, they also obtained a search warrant for Molly's own apartment and belongings soon after. Investigators searched Molly's bedroom at her parents' house. In doing so, they found some items that to them pointed to possible suicide preparation. They found internet search history on Molly's computer showing that she had searched suicide methods the day before her death. Molly's personal journal in which she had written about feeling unhappy and depressed. And some of the entries that they used to bolster their theory were really old and reflected struggles from a while ago.
Were there any recent ones that suggested that?
There were some recent ones about feeling unhappy, but it sounds like more of the depressed ones were more in the
further
background. Yeah.
Okay.
They also found a handwritten note on her bedroom floor addressed to Richie and her family and essentially calling it a goodbye note. In this note, Molly said farewell, something one might interpret as a suicide note.
Yeah.
Molly's family, however, contests the timing of that note. They acknowledge Molly wrote the note, but they believe that it was written much earlier, like when she was going through the cancer scare.
Oh, okay.
Without a date on the note, it's hard to know for sure when it was written, but its existence was certainly used by authorities as evidence that Molly had completed suicide. Also
I was going to say it's hard with that, plus her search history.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to see both. And I don't know. That does make it hard.
I sometimes wonder if people that maybe have those intentions realize that it will go that way in the investigation. I'm not saying that he did that, but when you hear about it, read about it, you might assume that they're just going to say she did it. If you position everything right and you don't have prints, you don't have gunshot residue, how are they going to say that you did it without a confession?
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Also, backing that narrative, Richie's roommate Wes told police that Molly had been struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. And in fact, a piece of evidence did reveal during the later coroner's inquest that Molly had texted Wes shortly before her death saying, quote, "I think I'm going to shoot myself in the head." This is a startling message, if true, and if sent by Molly herself, because it could have been sent from her phone to him after.
When is he saying it was sent?
I don't know exactly. It says shortly before. So I'm not sure if that was 4 a.m. or I don't know, or if it was 2 days before, right?
Yeah.
There was a text from Molly to Richie that night saying, "I don't want to live anymore." And again, with references to overdose attempts in her past and these text communications, it did cast a shadow of credibility on the suicide narrative.
Yeah.
But we have to consider if Molly truly intended to kill herself that night, why come over to Richie's apartment to do it? The only thing that I can answer for that question is if she truly did want to do it that way and she knew that he had a gun out that was easy access.
Yeah.
But it seems like where she wasn't familiar with guns, didn't like them, didn't want to use them. It's, to me, the same as Ellen Greenberg using a knife.
Yeah.
It seems like those are not the methods that you would use.
Yeah. Yeah.
If she was worried about Richie, thinking that he was dangerously drunk or suicidal himself, because there are claims that Richie had been threatening to harm himself earlier that week. Maybe she went over to check on him and they ended up in this dangerous situation.
Well, and maybe if he had been saying that too, maybe he did have the gun out and was threatening himself. And it could have been an accident. If she's trying to get it away from him, she's trying to help him, and he accidentally shot her in his drunken state, trying to hurt himself. I mean, that is a plausible situation.
Yeah, it is.
If she's trying to get it away from him and he's fighting her, that explains the scratch marks too.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
And that's why it's so tough. I honestly don't know how you could get to the bottom of what actually happened that night.
Yeah. Not without them saying it.
Or confessing to someone else who then eventually does say. Even then, I'm not sure if it would be taken seriously.
Yeah, that could explain some scratches on Wes, too. If he came out to help and she's struggling to get the gun away from him.
Yeah, agreed. And he might have been trying to help Richie, too.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If he's trying to help her get the gun from him and it's this whole fight between the three of them.
I did not see in any of the information if they checked under her fingernails, which would really surprise me if they didn't. Yeah. But I would like to know if there were any DNA evidence under her fingernails from one or both of them.
Yeah.
I feel like if they found that from both of them especially, you could see a completely different narrative.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason that she would scratch him if he was passed out drunk.
Right. Yeah. Especially if that's what she went over there for. She wouldn't want to wake him up.
No.
It would be you go, you find him passed out, you take his gun, you go hide in the bathroom or something. I mean, I don't know, but that's what it seems like. If you're that intent on doing it, you wouldn't be scratching him awake.
No, I think you would check his pulse, make sure he's okay, maybe sleep on the couch or lay down and continue checking his pulse or go back home. If he's passed out, why are you staying there if you're not?
Well, like you did go over there for that purpose.
Right.
If you were planning suicide.
Oh, I see.
You wouldn't wake him up. Yeah, you wouldn't try and wake him up. You would try and hide what you wouldn't, if that was your purpose for going out once you got there and he's passed out. Yeah. That's what your next plan is. I don't feel like you would try and wake him up.
No. No. That's hard to, I always try to think of all of the scenarios or options to try to make it make sense. And that just doesn't. So next, could those "I'm going to shoot myself" messages have been coerced or staged? This is a theory that the Young family has considered. For instance, could someone else have sent a text from Molly's phone to create the suicide narrative? There's no proof, but Larry Young later noted phone records showing Molly's phone had activity and possibly tampering after her death.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. And I don't know exactly what the tampering looks like. If people were getting into it and they could see that it was unlocking, I don't know if you could actually see that or not. But if they could see that after that time of death at 4:45, that's possible.
Yeah.
By the end of that first day, March 24th, 2012, no arrests were made. Molly's death was treated as suspicious but unexplained. The Jackson County State's Attorney, Mike Carr, would oversee the case. Early on, Carr had indicated that so far the case hadn't yielded sufficient evidence for criminal charges. So it remained open and unsolved. Ritchie quickly retained a defense attorney whose name was Terry Green. Green made a public statement on Ritchie's behalf saying, "Sadly, nothing that Ritchie or I can say or do will change the feelings of those who refuse to accept the facts of this tragedy. That this lovely young lady took her own life. Please do not mistake the lack of comment as evidence or wrongdoing." So, in other words, Ritchie's side maintained that Molly's death was a suicide, and they chose to stay mostly silent in the face of accusations. This sets the stage for a battle between these two competing narratives. Next, they had a formal inquiry to review Molly's death, which is called a coroner's inquest. In Illinois, mysterious or unattended deaths can be subject to a coroner's inquest, a public hearing where a jury reviews evidence and decides the manner of death, either homicide, suicide, accident, or undetermined or natural. In Molly Young's case, an inquest was convened, it was about 10 months after her death in January 2013. At the inquest, a 6-person coroner's jury heard evidence from investigators and the coroner's office about Molly's case, much of what we've already discussed. So they talked about Molly's texts, her journal, the toxicology, any physical evidence. That was all presented.
I know we said Ritchie and Wes, well, maybe Wes had some scratches, but definitely Ritchie had those scratches. Did she have any like bruises or any scratches or cuts or anything like that that they found on her?
They mostly talked about the forensic oddities, like the location of the gun wound being on the left side where Molly was right-handed, which caused several jurors to ask questions about that. They didn't bring up that I can find any scratches. They did say she had some bruising on her legs, but I don't know if they're able to say that that for sure came that day or how she got those. They also brought up her mental state. Jurors were told that she was depressed leading up to her death, which again is hotly debated. You know, her family says she was in a good place, but Then investigators found the journal and the letter, the text messages. They referred to them as dark journal entries, even though they were 2 years prior. They went through all of those. They also went through Molly's toxicology report from her autopsy. It showed no drugs except that possible trace of an over-the-counter histamine. There was some confusion over whether an anti-anxiety medication was present. The coroner's office had indicated that lorazepam was found in her system, but Molly's uncle disputed that, saying that only an antihistamine was found. I'm not sure why the difference in those two things, but there was no evidence of a lethal overdose or anything like that, which basically just helped to back the fact that the cause of death was the gunshot, not an overdose or something before that had happened.
And you said she had been on an antidepressant medication. Was that in adequate quantities in her toxicology report?
What I'm not sure from the two reporting, because one just says a little bit of that antihistamine, and then the other one says that there was her anti-anxiety medication.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm not even finding if it was at an adequate level or even if she still needed to be on it.
Okay.
Right? The jurors did question how you could be sleeping in the same room and not wake up when a .45 caliber gun was fired next to you. They had a firearms expert testify that in a small bedroom, a .45 gunshot would be deafening. Yeah. They compared the noise to louder than a jet engine in that confined space.
Interesting. Yeah, we talked about that before, how he or Wes even sleep through that.
Right. It doesn't seem possible, even if you have been drinking. And I didn't see if they took his blood alcohol at the time to see what it had gone to, because you could probably do the math and see what it had been at the time.
Yeah.
Or if Wes had also been drinking, because he's in the next room. Right. So it would have been really loud for him too, and it doesn't sound like he woke up.
Yeah. And they were in an apartment complex, right?
Yeah.
I still wonder how no one else heard that either.
Same. And
because, I mean,
maybe the timing, they weren't sure what they heard, car backfiring, muffled through the walls. And maybe that's why the police officer, like we talked about, was there between the 7 to 8, trying to figure out if a couple people had called saying they heard it or thought they heard it. But even then, that's kind of a big difference between 4:45 a.m. and 7 to 8.
7. Yeah, and I know we mentioned that before. Maybe they heard it and kind of woke up, but didn't really understand what they were hearing, or talked about it more when they woke up with someone else in the apartment. It was like, oh yeah, I heard that too.
Right.
But I mean, even nowadays, we have the Nextdoor app where it's like, oh, who heard a gunshot in the neighborhood? And it was like fireworks or a car or something.
Yeah.
And I know that there are a lot of things that people hear that could sound like that, but just seems weird that no one would call it in.
If you're dead asleep and being woken up, I would say if there's more than one, the first one wakes you up, then you hear it again.
Yeah.
But being woken up to that, I guess I could kind of see.
Or you could put it off, oh, it's maybe a car, maybe in that area that is something that happens, like car backfiring, or ours is always fireworks.
We're always hearing. Yeah. And they like echo in this area, so they sound really loud even when they're not close.
Yeah.
The jury also heard about the lack of gunshot residue and prints, no fingerprints on the gun. And again, we talked about why that could be, but that is a huge question. Also, and finally, they brought up the scratches on Richie and the timeline issues. I'm not certain how deeply the inquest went into Richie's scratches or the delayed call timeline, but given that it's public knowledge now, it was discussed at the inquiry. the official time of death being 4:45 versus the call not till 9. And my question still is, when did his coworker call to ask if he's coming to work? 2 hours seems like a long time.
Yes, I think
And I'm
so
not
too.
sure why I can't find that, because that
Yeah.
seems important.
Yes, because if that is what woke him up and it's at 7:15 or 7:30 or 8 o'clock, I can't imagine waiting 2 hours to
If
call
she's
someone to see
in
if
the
they're coming
room
to
with
work.
you. Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, for his coworker to
Oh,
call.
yeah. I can't imagine
Why would
waiting
they
that
wait
long.
2
30
hours?
minutes max. Yeah,
Max, yeah.
yeah,
And he's supposed to be there at 7.
right.
Seems way too long.
It does seem in this one that there are too many questions to not
Yes.
look into it further.
Yes.
After reviewing all this, the coroner's jury had a tough task. In the end, in January 2013, they reached a conclusion that Molly's manner of death could not be determined. So it was ruled undetermined, which meant that they didn't feel confident labeling it as a suicide, but they also didn't feel like they had enough evidence to declare that it was homicide. So basically, they said, we're not sure. Notably, initially, the Jackson County coroner himself had leaned towards calling it a suicide earlier in 2012. But due to the family's urging, the inquest was held, and that overruled his initial wanting to call it a suicide.
Okay.
For Molly's family, this was a small victory. At least it's not case closed.
Yeah.
An acknowledgement that doubt existed that it was a suicide.
Yeah.
From the outside perspective, the undetermined ruling meant that law enforcement could not close the case. An open case meant that, in theory, investigation could continue and charges could still be filed if new evidence arose. So if you'll remember with Ellen Greenberg, hers was ruled a suicide, and then her family had to fight to get that changed. And normally, family cannot change what they decide from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting that even among experts, opinions were divided. On one hand, forensic specialists like Dr. Lawrence Kobylinski, who's an often quoted expert, reviewed the autopsy and publicly commented that the findings, quote, appear consistent with suicide. He noted the contact wound and the unfortunate reality that determining homicide versus suicide in cases like this is really difficult.
Yeah.
He also acknowledged Molly's psychological history as a factor, leaning towards suicide in his assessment. On the other hand, the totality of circumstances made other experts hesitate or even flat out refuse the suicide theory. Tim Corbet, a veteran homicide detective who later joined the case pro bono, which I just love those. I think that's such a kind thing to do for these families.
Yeah, for sure.
Plainly stated, I don't believe that this was a suicide, not for 1 minute. Even at the time, law enforcement quietly suspected foul play, but acknowledged that they lacked a smoking gun with evidence to prove it. So it's mostly, we think she probably didn't do this. We just can't find the piece of evidence that could result in a conviction.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it is the lack of evidence with the no fingerprints on the gun, not even hers, the lack of gunshot residue. Those two things, if Richie's claim is true that he was asleep this whole time, why wouldn't she have that on her? And why wouldn't the gun have her fingerprints on it? To me, it's that lack of evidence that points to it being not a suicide.
I feel like he must have said, or his lawyer must have said, he saw the gun covered in blood and just his instinct was to clean it off because it's his and he doesn't want it getting, which seems, I hate that.
Yeah.
But how can you prove that he did or didn't handle it that way?
Yeah.
Or he did try to check her pulse and got blood, so he cleaned his hands before going to the station.
But then also, if he picked up and cleaned the gun, why aren't his prints on there to explain that?
Well, if he cleaned it with like a cloth after, say, maybe rinsing it and then wiped it down and set
and
it
then
down with the
threw
clock.
it back by her. Seems so weird to me. It just doesn't make sense. Like, why would you clean it and then
by her,
put it back down by her? Yeah.
If he had moved it, then you've got some deniability there.
Yeah,
but
if he had picked it up and cleaned it and put it somewhere else, but if they said they found it by her, why would you pick it up and clean it and then throw it back down by her? And then
you would have to see the crime scene photos.
And he said he didn't even see the gunshot wound at first. He was saying it was an overdose.
Yeah.
So if he had seen the gun and picked it up and cleaned it, I don't know. It just, and then they said they saw it later. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. And it would have had to be in that really short time frame between his first call where he said it was an overdose, his second call where he said that there was a gun, and then when police got there. And that was a really short amount of time. Why would you touch it?
Yeah. And you work with the police. You know you shouldn't be handling that.
What would you tell somebody to do if you were the one taking that call?
Yeah. He would know not to touch it.
And that's the thing, too. If he literally had nothing to do with it, her fingerprints are on it, why would you clean it off? Because all that does is cast doubt on you.
Yeah.
I don't know why her hands wouldn't have gunshot residue on them.
Yes.
And I still can't get over the left-handed downward direction.
And why would you do it that way? If you went in there and it's just you, they're asleep, why would you do it in such a weird way like that?
Right.
That would be, because I always feel like if that's something that you're doing and that's your choice and, you've made that decision, you probably wouldn't do it in a way that you might mess it up, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like, because I think trying to go across, you have a much better chance of aiming too far forward or somewhere where it wouldn't work.
Or if you are using that left hand,
like, why though?
Why? It's not your dominant hand. You're not in a good headspace. Why would you use your left hand?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
And why wouldn't you just do what would be the most obvious way to do that?
Right. And then you would have that on your hands and you would have fingerprints on the gun because you would have been holding it before. Even, right? No fingerprints makes no sense to me.
And the lack of gunshot residue.
Yeah.
If it was her that did it, it would be on her hands.
They wouldn't have
cleaned her hands. Right. The boys wouldn't have cleaned her hand even if they cleaned the gun. No. Why would they get up and clean her hands when she's deceased on the floor? There's no way that they would do that.
Agreed. Larry Young, Molly's father, feels the same way. He is completely unconvinced that his daughter took her own life. He says that he recalls arriving at the hospital the day of Molly's death and immediately sensing something was off. He said he was, quote, suspicious from day one about the circumstances. Over time, Larry has become the most vocal advocate for his daughter, essentially turning into an investigator himself. His mission is twofold, he says. He wants to find out what really happened to Molly and hold the authorities accountable for what he believed were investigative failures. He famously said, quote, "I'm not making this a mission for my daughter. An injustice to one is an injustice to all," end quote. Shortly after Molly's death, Larry and supporters created a Justice for Molly Facebook page, which quickly gained tens of thousands of followers. The case started making headlines not just locally, but also nationally. People all over were intrigued and outraged, asking what exactly happened to Molly Young. By August 2013, so about 7 months after the coroner's inquest, the Facebook group had over 22,000 members, demonstrating this groundswell of public support for the Young family in their search for answers. They had yard signs, billboards, and T-shirts with slogans seeking justice for Molly, and it popped up all over Southern Illinois. The public pressure did help keep the case in the news. Yeah. Larry realized early on that if he wanted answers, he'd have to pry the information out of the law enforcement files. He began filing Freedom of Information Act requests, which are called FOIAs, to obtain police reports, call logs, forensic test results, anything related to Molly's case. This, on its own, turned into a lengthy battle. The Carbondale Police Department initially wouldn't hand over their records. At one point, Carbondale PD even denied Larry's FOIA request as, quote, unduly burdensome. I'm sorry, what? They claimed
that he's trying to figure this out for his daughter.
FOIA is there for a reason. That's part of your job. They claimed that it was a duplicate of an earlier request. Larry said at the time he had never received anything and that a lot of the documents that he did eventually end up getting were heavily redacted. He appealed to the Illinois State General's Public Access Counselor. The Illinois State Police also denied access to certain materials, most notably the crime scene and autopsy photographs, citing, quote, personal privacy exemptions. Larry refused to accept these denials. He filed appeals, and in 2015, so now it's been 3 years since this happened to Molly, the Illinois Attorney General's office issued letters instructing both the Carbondale PD and the Illinois State Police to stop withholding records from Larry. Thank goodness.
Yeah. I'm glad that they sided with him.
Me too. In July 2015, the AG determined that Carbondale police had violated FOIA and ordered them to release the records with, quote, minimal redactions. In early 2016, the AG issued a binding opinion requiring the Illinois State Police to release the Molly Young case photographs that Larry had been seeking. That battle, though, that took almost 4 years. That has to be torturous to wait that long.
So frustrating.
And go back and forth and try to figure out the legal system. I don't think most people know what a FOIA is. They don't know how to request that or what your options are if it comes back and says, no.
That's unfortunate because I feel like that is the case with so many things and they just make it so hard because most likely they want people to give up, which is so sad when he's seeking justice for her.
And why do you want him to give up? Why don't you want him to see it? If you're confident in your work, why can't he look at it?
Yeah.
I don't understand.
No, that doesn't make any sense.
Larry said that it was his third FOIA request just to get the photographs. Once he finally got them, he chose not to view those on advice that he didn't need those images seared in his memory. Instead, he got together a team of forensic experts to analyze them. Larry had assembled a team of forensic experts to analyze the photos for any evidence of foul play that might have been missed. By collecting documents, Larry eventually amassed hundreds of records, 10 hours of videos, 19 lab reports, and over 700 crime scene photos. So at least there was that.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah. Essentially, he had in his possession most of the case file. With these, he spotted and his team also spotted what they believe were numerous discrepancies and signs of, quote, incompetence or worse. So, for example, or worse, like a specific cover-up, right, instead of just incompetence. For example, he found documentation like the telephone records that we discussed, indicating that Richie had been allowed to wash up, which is not what official statements said. He noted Richie's phone records and Molly's phone activity that raised eyebrows about the timing. He kept careful track of every discrepancy. Larry's relentless FOIA campaign and the stonewalling he encountered would actually later inspire significant legal change, which we'll get to in a minute. Frustrated with the criminal investigation, basically just stalling, in 2014, Larry filed a $1 million wrongful death civil lawsuit against Richie. And he says, and we've heard it before, it's not about the money. It's about being able to have these people testify under oath, get access to documents, especially since at that time, a lot of his FOIA requests had been denied. And it would take several more years for him to get the things that he needed.
Yeah.
His ultimate goal was for his attorney to interview, talk to, depose witnesses under oath, and obtain evidence that maybe he wouldn't be able to see otherwise. In the lawsuit, Larry alleged that Richie was responsible for Molly's death and authorities had fraudulently concealed facts. The complaint pointed out specific alleged acts of concealment. So specifically, that Richie waited nearly 6 hours to call 911 after Molly died, that he moved Molly's body and wiped the gun clean of fingerprints after her death, that he falsely told the dispatcher that Molly had overdosed, and he also claimed that police had allowed Richie to shower and wash his clothes at the scene. The police had never interviewed neighbors, and then later lied by saying they had actually interviewed those neighbors. Essentially, part of his lawsuit was accusing the police of aiding a cover-up, or at the very least, being negligent and failing to do their duty.
Yeah.
Larry's attorney argued that these actions, especially by police, amounted to fraudulent concealment, which under law can toll or extend the statute of limitations. So normally, Illinois has a 2-year deadline to file a wrongful death claim. Molly died in 2012, and by the time that Larry filed suit, technically more than 2 years had passed. And if you think about it, that's a really short time frame when you can't get access to the files because your FOIA is denied. You can't even get into that coroner's inquest until nearly a year after this happened. And then you only have that 2-year time frame.
Especially if they make it so hard to get all those files, they could do that on purpose if they extend it and deny it over and over and over again. And then they're like, oh, okay, now you can have it. It's been 3 years or whatever. That's not okay.
And along with that, you don't even know what you need for it when police lied to you in the first place, like Larry's claiming, and you can't get the files. So how do you even know? And so if you don't have an actual case, that's going to get thrown out and the whole point. And then you can't try again.
Right.
It's infuriating. In May of 2015, the judge dismissed Larry's lawsuit, citing that it was filed too late. The judge, W. Charles Grace, did not accept the argument that the fraudulent concealment should extend the statute of limitations on the case. He essentially said even if those allegations were true, he could have filed within 2 years regardless. This was devastating to Molly's family.
Yeah.
Her father famously said, quote, "If a police officer files a false police report on a case, which is a felony with a 2-year statute of limitations, if that false report's been blacked out for the 2 years, then how do you follow that official misconduct? How do you hold them accountable if they hide the evidence for 2 years?" End quote.
Yeah, exactly.
It's this catch-22. It's not possible.
Right.
Larry appealed the dismissal on the grounds of equitable tolling, meaning it should have extended the statute of limitations, arguing he used due diligence, but still couldn't have known what he needed in time. But that case ultimately did not proceed to trial. However, it's got to be just soul crushing. Like, did everything possible and were stonewalled, and now your 2 years are up.
Yeah. It's terrible.
Yeah. Larry didn't view it as a total loss because during the litigation process, there were some depositions and sworn statements taken, which is what he wanted, right? Yeah. According to later summary, questioning of roommate Wes in depositions revealed inconsistencies in what Wes had said earlier versus under oath. Also, Larry said Carbondale's police chief, Jody O'Quinn's statements had discrepancies, and some phone records released showed that Molly's phone might have been tampered with around the time of her death. So these small things, while not enough to win the lawsuit, further fueled the Youngs' belief that there was a cover-up or, again, at the very least, a severely botched investigation from the beginning.
Yeah.
Hitting all of those legal roadblocks in court, Larry pivoted to advocating for legal reform. He worked with Illinois state legislatures to draft what became known as Molly's Law. In 2016, with bipartisan support, 2 important changes were signed into Illinois law. First, there was an extension of statute of limitations for wrongful death. So for cases involving violent intentional conduct, which is essentially potential homicide, the statute of limitations to file a lawsuit was extended from 2 years to 5 years.
That's good.
This law directly addressed the problem that Larry faced. So now families in similar situations would have that longer window to seek civil justice. There was
and he
also
couldn't utilize that, right? Because it was passed
I don't
after.
believe so, even though it would have been 4 years, but I don't know if because it was dismissed and then dismissed again on appeal, maybe. They also had a FOIA enhancement as part of it. It was a companion part of Molly's Law. It strengthened the Freedom of Information Act process. So it allowed requesters whose FOIA requests were wrongly denied to seek review by the Attorney General and then to enforce the Attorney General's opinion in court. It also introduced financial penalties for agencies that willfully and intentionally fail to comply with FOIA. So fines range from $2,500 up to $5,000, plus additional daily fines for continued noncompliance.
Wow. That's great change that he was able to get, and hopefully other families that are still fighting or will be fighting will be able to take advantage of that. Yeah.
Exactly. And if you can get your FOIA through faster, then maybe you don't need the other one or vice versa, right?
Yeah.
In July of 2016, Molly's Law was signed and Larry stood by the governor at the signing. He said this was the biggest victory in Molly's legacy.
Yeah.
Throughout the years, despite many disappointments, Larry Young has never lost hope. He said, quote, "Justice is a slow process, a lot slower than I'd like it to be for sure," end quote.
Yeah.
He has kept faith that someday the truth will come out, and he isn't alone. He has tens of thousands of supporters that rally around this case. You've got journalists and independent investigators that are digging into it, all trying to figure out some way. With the case officially still open but inactive at the state level, so no charges filed, years began to pass. Molly's family marked birthdays, anniversaries, holidays without her. They have held memorials and have continued to raise awareness. Behind the scenes, there's been changes in local leadership that have given them new hope over the years. In late 2020, Joe Cervantes, I hope I said that right, was elected as the new Jackson County State's Attorney General, unseating the prior state's attorney, Mike Carr, who had been in office during the initial investigation and then the inquest. Joe took office in 2021 and would be overseeing Molly's case. He vowed to take fresh eyes to Molly's file. He noted that after the appellate prosecutor's office, which is an external agency, after they had reviewed the case years ago and left it open, that there hadn't been much movement. Larry said, quote, "The disappointment is they, sitting on the case for 10 years, leaving it open for further evidence to surface, but then not hiring experts or interviewing people further."
Yeah.
End quote. He's saying, what new evidence? Is it just going to be a tip because you're not doing anything to actively find new evidence?
Right.
In 2023, our new AG initiated a plan. Bring in an independent expert get opinions from outside this normal chain of command. He said, quote,
Good.
I think we owe the family and the public at least another opinion that's outside of our chain of command. Not a
Yeah,
lay
for sure.
opinion, but an expert opinion. And that's what we're doing. He said this in April 2024. Essentially, he was hiring fresh forensic consultants to re-examine the evidence, almost like a cold case review.
Yeah.
Even before the official experts came in, an independent retired detective, who we've mentioned previously, Tim Corbett, had joined the hunt for answers. He is a well-respected retired homicide commander from Indiana who had heard about the case, got to him, touched his heart. He volunteered to help the young family at no charge. He started working as a private consultant on Molly's case, paying his own way. He said, quote, everything that I have to do, I will pay for because I feel there's been a disservice here.
Yeah.
With decades of experience, he rolled up his sleeves and started from square one. He re-interviewed people, analyzed all the documents, all the videos, everything that Larry had, all the photos, and followed up on leads that he found were never pursued. By 2024, Tim had compiled...
Didn't you say he started in 2024? Like April 2024?
No, that was when Illinois decided to bring in fresh, independent forensic investigators.
Okay.
Tim had been working with Larry for a little while.
Oh, before this.
Yeah. By the time we got to 2024, he had compiled 500 pages of new statements from interviews he conducted. He said, I've been able to talk to people who haven't been talked to in the past. Ever.
Good.
Some of these were neighbors, friends, or others with information who, mind-blowingly, had never been formally interviewed in 2012.
Which is so sad that it's 12 years later. So much is lost or forgotten.
Absolutely.
Awful.
And tracking these people down is a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
So awful. Even 5 years later, it would be tough. Yeah. He also re-interviewed some key figures to catch any discrepancies. And he indicated that he had uncovered new leads and clues and openly questioned the original timeline and the investigation thoroughness. And without revealing any specifics, because he's keeping that close to the chest to not tip off any potential suspects, Corbett expressed strong confidence in the homicide theory. He said, quote, from what I know about this case, I'm very confident. I don't believe this was a suicide, not for a minute. One glaring aspect that he and others harped on was the issue of the gunshot noise. He actually went and recreated this scenario. So he had a 9 by 12 foot room, the same .45 caliber gun. They had it go off. He described it, which we mentioned before, as louder than a jet engine. He cannot accept that he simply cannot accept that two people, Richie and Wes, in the apartment slept through that, no matter how much you had been drinking.
Yeah.
If the roommate was in another room and maybe very intoxicated, but you think about in an apartment, those aren't soundproof walls in between rooms.
No, even in between floors, let's be honest.
Absolutely. Right. Richie, by his own account, was right next to Molly when it happened. And even if you say he was completely blacked out, it still doesn't make sense.
No.
While Larry had been excited about the new state's attorney general because he had publicly stated in 2024 that he intended to see resolution in this case. He had said, ultimately, cases like this need to have resolution for the sake of the victim's family. It's my intent to have a resolution to this case one way or another by the end of my term. But unfortunately, he lost re-election in 2024. And I went and looked. He lost by 39 votes out of 21,000, which was like 0.2%.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. He is currently considering, last I looked, running for Illinois State Attorney General, but that hasn't happened yet. April 2024 would have been Molly's 34th birthday. Media reports described renewed hope in the investigation, and Larry said that he definitely has more hope than he's had in the last 10 years. He could sense momentum, especially with that seasoned investigator on his side. At this point in 2025, recording this episode, the case officially remains open and unsolved. No one has been charged with any crime related to Molly's death, but it does seem closer to some conclusion. Investigators say they are, quote, closing in on solving her mysterious death. Whether that results in an arrest or just a more definitive statement on what happened, we'll wait to see. Yeah. I truly, truly hope that we can do an update to this case in the future.
Yeah, me too.
And I need to emphasize, with everything we've talked about, Richie has never been charged with any crime in relation to Molly's death. There are other possibilities out there. There are possibilities that someone else was there. There are possibilities that someone followed her inside and maybe Richie really was passed out. Maybe there are other ways this could have gone, especially seeing somebody alone, a female, walking into an apartment at 3 a.m., 3:30 a.m. Maybe they thought it was her apartment and followed her in, and crime of opportunity.
Yeah.
And investigators were so focused on the suicide theory, it is possible.
It's possible.
So I do want to emphasize he's never been charged with any crime, and that he maintains through his attorney's statements that he is innocent and that Molly tragically took her own life. He has essentially refused to publicly detail his side in detail. I would love to hear his full account if he did testify.
Yeah.
But on the other side, Molly's family will not be convinced that she completed suicide ever. And Larry said, as time goes by, I'm even more convinced that somebody took her life.
Yeah.
He said that as early as 2013. He continues to stand by that. To him, the evidence that he's collected all points one way, either homicide or intimate homicide. The public, particularly those following the Facebook page and local news, overwhelmingly seem to side with the young family's view. The case has at times pitted supporters against local officials, with rumors of corruption and cover-up. And in fact, the Carbondale police chief, Judy O'Gwyn, who was adamant back in 2013 that this is not a conspiracy, it's not a cover-up, was fired in 2014. They say that it was not related to Molly's case, but there was criticism and other cases and a whole rabbit hole that you can go down on that as well.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah. The Carbondale PD and the state attorney's office insist that they simply lack evidence to prosecute. Indeed, proving a homicide beyond a reasonable doubt, especially now so many years later, is challenging.
Yeah.
I did just hear about a case being solved 70 years later, which we might have to cover, but it's always possible. Always.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Hopefully they have things saved. I mean, if there was any DNA evidence like under her fingernails or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I hope that they saved and preserved that in a way that it can be evaluated if it comes to that.
Agreed. Yes. Me too. I really hope that they have things that they can fall back on, because even if you do get enough, you still need to build a whole case.
I kind of feel like might not have that, especially if it was some kind of cover-up deal.
The thing that helps me feel like maybe they do is because Larry was so on top of it and followed up quickly and was paying attention. And he had
but if they didn't collect it in the beginning.
True. And that's a different story, but something.
Yeah.
In conclusion, the story of Molly Young's death is a heartbreaking mix of tragedy and mystery. We have the loss of this vibrant, creative, talented 21-year-old woman who had her whole life ahead of her. A talented artist who was described as happy with a heart of gold. And on the other hand, we have this unresolved quest for truth that has consumed her family for years.
Yeah.
The
So
changes
sad.
in state law, though, is absolutely a legacy that has her name on it, which I love. Larry once said, quote, "It disgusts me that a young woman could lose her life like that and no one seems to care." But I say
sad.
we care.
We care.
We care. His supporters, the people that follow her case, they care.
Yeah.
For now, we're left with the haunting question, what happened that night? Was it what Richie's saying, or are we missing some key details here? I feel like we're missing some key details here. And whether that points one way or another.
Yeah. I do feel like there are pieces missing. And even if it was tragically a suicide, we're still missing some details. And if they have those answers, why haven't they provided them?
Right.
But there's things that just don't add up here.
Yes. This one
it's missing either way. Details are missing either way.
Yes.
No matter
agreed.
which way it goes, a homicide or a suicide.
Mm-hmm. And why?
Details matter. I've been saying that to my son all week with school. Like, the details matter. You have to, that tells the story. And when you don't have that, you can't tell the full story. And it's definitely not there.
Agreed. In everything that we covered from beginning to end, there are missing pieces. Yes. And it sounds like they're collecting those. But like you said, if they weren't collected from the beginning. Yeah. If you have any tips or information about Molly's case, they are still looking for any and all information. We encourage you to reach out to the Jackson County State's Attorney Office or the Illinois State Police. And we will list both of those in our show notes and on our blog because we would really like to see our family get answers.
Yeah. We'll watch for detail or for updates on this one.
Yes, absolutely.
I got them all. Just add it to your list.
Yes. I always try to look right before we record too, just because my research takes a while and I want to make sure that these things that we are talking about, hoping that they have answers. I want to see if there's anything possible that we can add in right before.
Yeah,
we will keep an eye out. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Crime Clueless. We appreciate you spending your time with us. If you want to see the resources that we use to create this case, you can head to our blog, which is on our website, crimeclueless.com. You can also see the other cases we've covered, listen to episodes, learn more about us if you so care to.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed today's episode, we would love if you would rate or review or share our podcast. It means the world to us. It helps us reach more listeners. It's free, fast, easy, and it helps us grow our community. You can find Crime Clueless on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, iHeart, Audible, Podguru, all major streaming platforms. Yes,
everywhere.
All streaming platforms.
Yep.
And as always, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murderers.
Bye.
Bye.